I've been working the graveyard shift at this remote gas station for years, and I've seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things. But nothing could have prepared me for the night that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. It was a cold and quiet night, as usual. The wind howled outside, and the dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I was sitting behind the counter, reading a tattered magazine to pass the time when the bell above the door jingled, signaling a customer's arrival. I looked up and saw a lone figure enter the store. He was tall, with a hood pulled low over his face, obscuring his features. I couldn't make out much about him except for his dark, tattered clothing and the way he moved like a shadowy specter. He approached the counter, his footsteps echoing in the empty store. His voice was a low, raspy whisper as he asked for a pack of cigarettes. I reached for them, trying not to make eye contact. There was something off about him, something that sent a shiver down my spine. As I handed him the cigarettes, he leaned in closer, his hood falling back to reveal a face that would forever haunt my nightmares. His skin was deathly pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were a chilling shade of ice blue, like two frozen pools staring back at me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Can I help you with anything else?" I managed to stammer, trying to sound casual, despite the unease that gripped me. He didn't respond, but his lips curled into a sinister smile, revealing rows of crooked, yellowed teeth. My heart raced, and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. I had to get out of there, but I couldn't move. I was trapped behind the counter, my legs feeling like lead. Suddenly, he reached out with long, bony fingers, his nails yellowed and cracked. His hand touched my forearm, and a searing pain shot through me. I screamed and jerked back, knocking over a display of chips and candy bars. The sound of the crash seemed to startle him, and he recoiled, his eyes narrowing. Without thinking, I darted out from behind the counter, my heart pounding as I raced for the door. I could hear his footsteps behind me, his low, guttural growl echoing in the air. I burst through the door and into the freezing night, the wind cutting through my clothes. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest police station, where I frantically recounted my terrifying encounter. But when they went back to the gas station to investigate, there was no sign of the strange man with the chilling blue eyes and the sinister smile. I had been driving for hours, the open road stretching endlessly before me as I embarked on a long-awaited road trip with my son. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the highway. As the gas gauge dipped perilously close to empty, I pulled into a desolate-looking gas station that seemed like it had been plucked from the pages of a horror novel. My son, a restless teenager, immediately jumped out of the car and rushed towards the small convenience store attached to the station. "Dad, I need to use the bathroom. I'll be quick," he yelled, disappearing through the grimy glass door. I sighed, knowing this was going to be a longer pit stop than I had hoped for. I grabbed the gas pump and began filling up the tank, the mechanical whir of the pump echoing eerily in the desolate silence. After what felt like an eternity, the nozzle clicked off, signaling that the tank was full. I replaced the nozzle and turned towards the store, expecting to see my son bounding out any moment. But when I looked through the grimy window, I couldn't see him. I felt a pang of unease. It had been too long for just a bathroom break. Just as I was about to march into the store, the passenger side door opened and my son climbed into the car. He looked a little pale and clammy, but I brushed it off as the discomfort of a dirty restroom. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. He nodded weakly, and we pulled away from the gas station. But as we merged back onto the highway, I noticed a battered old pickup truck following closely behind us. It tailgated us aggressively, its high beams blinding me in the rearview mirror. I increased my speed, trying to put some distance between us and the menacing truck. But no matter how fast I drove, it stayed on our tail, relentlessly pursuing us. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced over at my son. He seemed oddly calm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The pickup truck continued to follow us, swerving dangerously close to our bumper, its horn blaring loudly. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I couldn't outrun this madman, and I couldn't risk pulling over on this isolated stretch of highway. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted a rest area up ahead. I signaled and pulled off the highway, hoping there would be other people around. The pickup truck followed us, coming to a screeching halt behind our car. The driver of the truck jumped out and stormed towards my window. I rolled it down cautiously, my heart still racing. "You've got someone in your back seat who doesn't belong there," the man in the truck said, his voice trembling with fear. I exchanged a confused glance with my supposed son, who sat quietly beside me. Trembling, I turned to look in the rearview mirror. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the back seat, was a man I had never seen before. His eyes were hollow and devoid of any emotion, and a sinister smile crept across his face as he locked eyes with mine. My real son emerged from the gas station restroom moments later, and as he approached the car, confusion clouding his face, I knew we had been driving with a stranger all along. The imposter's smile widened, and the horrifying reality of the situation sent shivers down my spine. As the police were called and the imposter was apprehended, I couldn't help but wonder how close we had come to something far more sinister on that desolate highway. The gas station, once a mere pit stop on our road trip, had turned into a nightmare I would never forget. I hated the night shift at the gas station. It was a lonely job, and the only company I had were the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. But that night, the feeling of unease was stronger than ever. It started with a subtle but unmistakable shift in the air, like a storm brewing on the horizon. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was off. My name tag read Dave, and I had worked this job for years without ever feeling this unsettled. The rain pounded against the windows, creating a disorienting backdrop to my growing unease. I scanned the small convenience store, my eyes darting from the snacks to the empty coffee pots. I was the only soul in the place, and I had begun to feel like a prisoner of the night. The aisles seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with shadows that danced in the dim light. Then I heard it, a faint creaking sound coming from the back of the store, like footsteps on old wooden boards. My heart skipped a beat, and I strained my ears, trying to dismiss it as the wind or my imagination. But there it was again, louder this time, and unmistakably real. I reached under the counter and grabbed the baseball bat we kept for security. My knuckles whitened as I gripped it tightly, my senses on high alert. The door to the storage room was slightly ajar, and I knew I had to investigate. I had no choice but to confront the source of my growing dread. I crept toward the door, my footsteps almost inaudible on the worn linoleum floor. The creaking grew louder with each step, and my heart raced in my chest. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, and a wave of cold dread washed over me. A man stood in the storage room, his back to me. He was dressed in tattered clothes, his silhouette eerie against the dim light. His head was hunched, and his shoulders shook with an unnatural rhythm. "Hey, who are you?" I stammered, raising the bat defensively. The man didn't respond, and his trembling grew more pronounced. I took a step closer, my voice trembling. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now." Suddenly, he turned toward me, and the sight that met my eyes froze me in place. His face was twisted in a grotesque grin, his eyes hollow and devoid of emotion. In his hand, he held a bloodied knife, its blade glinting malevolently in the dim light. Without warning, he charged at me, a guttural, inhuman growl escaping his lips. I swung the bat with all my strength, connecting with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground, the knife falling from his hand. Trembling and covered in cold sweat, I dialed 911, my voice shaky as I reported the intruder. The police arrived shortly, taking the man into custody. They told me he was deranged and dangerous, responsible for a string of gruesome murders in the area.